Welcome, everybody. My name is Rob Vincent. I'm the Associate Administrator for Alcohol Prevention and Treatment Policy here at SAMHSA's Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. I am joined today by Aaron Wick, who is the Senior Advisor, Senior Director for Behavioral Health and Student Supports at Capital Region ESD 113. And I'm also joined by Christy Bren, the assistant professor of the School of Psychology at the Department of Educational Psychology at Miami University. Welcome to each of you, and we are joined here today for Webinar 4, the Student Assistance Programs, Planning and Implementation for Talk They Hear You. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Erin to introduce her team, and then Christy, if you could introduce your team, that would be wonderful.
Hi, thank you for being here for our webinar today. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our team from ESD 113 in Washington. We have Izzy Chavez, who's a student assistance professional here, as well as Sarah Ellsworth, our regional administrator of behavioral health and student supports. And then we are just lucky to have Jill Smith, who is our school counselor and huge champion of our services at Hoquiam High School, where we're implementing services there. And with that, I'm going to send it over to Christy.
Great. And for the Ohio School Wellness Initiative, we have Emily Eckert, Assistant Director for the Office of Whole Child Supports for the Ohio Department of Education, and Valerie Connolly Leach, Behavioral Health Prevention Administrator for the Office of Prevention and Wellness with the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services.
Thank each of you today. And I know we're joined by lots of people online with us today viewing this webinar. Just a reminder, it is being recorded. So please just be aware of that. And today's session, we're planning on covering what does quality implementation mean for student assistance services? Some of the steps with internal referral processes, as well as direct services to students and the kind of type and range of direct services, which can be everything from a tier 1 to a tier 3 type of service. And we'll talk more about that as we get going. Also, we want to help people understand risk and protective factors a little bit and what goes into making good programs. So with that, if we can go ahead and advance the slide, Dave. So in this series, just so for those just joining us today, so you know where we're at in the series, we've gone through what student assistance programs are, standing up student assistance program services, assessing needs and building capacity. And we're the place where we're at today is planning and implementation. And this would be webinar 4. We will conclude with our 5th one, which we'll talk more about program evaluation and improvement. So we can go ahead and advance, Dave. So today's presentation is going to include 5 short polls to help us learn more about today's webinar participants. If you'd be so kind to answer the polls, that would be helpful and instructive for us. All the answers that you're going to provide us today will be presented as totals or percentages. No one will really be able to tell how specific individuals have answered, unless, of course, you put your name in the chat somehow or a text box. By answering the questions, you are agreeing to have your answers anonymously included in the totals of these percentages. If we can advance, please. Thank you. So let's start with our first poll today. Are you a school administrator, a district administrator, student assistance program professional, an educator, Department of Health, Prevention Coalition member, or something else? And these will be tight turnarounds, so I'm just going to give you just a few seconds. We call it fast fingers, so we can do that. So the poll will only stay open about 15 or 20 seconds here. So. All right, and so here's who's with us today. About 19% of you are student assistance professionals, about 1% are educators. We've got 3% that are from health district employees, and then about 62% of you are from a coalition. And then we've got some other folks, about 14% who have joined us here today. So thank you very much for taking time to help us understand a little bit more about you. And Dave, if you would be so kind. So I just want to review some of the critical components that we talk about for effective student assistance programs. There are really 9 critical areas that we think of. We are focusing today on internal referral processes as well as direct services to students. So that's where we're at in the process, but I just want to briefly talk about the components collectively. It's very important that you think through as you're implementing or championing or planning for student assistance programs or services in your school, that you think about all of the various components and how you might do that and work through that process. It's also important, today we'll be focusing on more specifically that inner ring there, the services themselves. So this could range for everything from educational type classes to prevention, early intervention, identification, what types of evidence-based programs you might be thinking about, and how you might be establishing referral processes. So with that, if we can go ahead and advance the slides, Dave. Now, I know many of you are going to be familiar with this, but this is SAMHSA's Strategic Prevention Planning Framework. It really is just basic strategic planning. We talk about the 5 steps of the process: assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And today we're really focusing on that 3rd piece of this. Now, we're always going to draw a thread through sustainability and cultural competence, but there are many ways to get started as you think about that. But more importantly, that you think through is, what is your existing infrastructure? What kinds of resources are available to you? And what do you need? Where are the gaps? So Dave, if you could advance this, please. And we are going to get into poll question number 2. Do you currently have an active SAP? If yes, I'm sorry about that. Yes, we are currently have an active SAP. No, we used to have an SAP but no longer active. No, we are currently in the process of developing and implementing. No, but we plan to develop and implement an SAP. Or no, we do not plan to develop or implement an SAP. So again, fast fingers. And we'll only be open for about 15 or 20 seconds. So we appreciate your expediency here, but the goal here is really just to get a better sense for everybody. All right, and our poll is closed. And yes, we currently have an SAP. That's about 62% of you. It looks like 2% of you had one and no longer have one. But about 12%, apologies, are in the process of developing an SAP. And then some of you, about 22%, are planning to do some development as well. And then 3% not at all. So thank you for that. And we'll get started. So let me just talk a little bit about what makes successful prevention programs and some of the characteristics that really are fundamental to prevention success. Now, I know many of you have probably heard parts and pieces of this in a number of areas or from different folks, but it really is important to have a good theory and evidence or research base for your content structure and your implementation. This is the whole reason why we go through the 5-step planning model with the strategic prevention planning framework, is to sort of work through some of those things. It's also very important to really clearly define attainable and agreed upon goals. And I'm going to emphasize agreed upon because in some cases you will be an invited guest into a schoolhouse, so your goals as a behavioral health organization may or may not line up with that of the school. So you'll need to work through those conversations. Also, multi-system, multi-level perspectives really help to address a number of the influences that we talk about in risk and protective factors. You want to attend to what is the intensity of services, or sometimes what's called frequency and dosage. And sometimes people want to shortcut. And so many of you, Project Alert is one of those programs where I listened to teachers over the years literally say, well, we just want to do lessons 1, 3, and 5, or something like that. And those are really problematic when you do that. You want to adapt a strengths perspective to address really competence and the risk factors themselves, and so that you're actually building on that rather than a deficits model. And then sensitive to both content and structure during your implementation. And there will be cases where you'll have to adjust or adapt. You want to incorporate high quality evaluation and monitoring, and I know nobody really pays for evaluation, but it is really important to your implementation to at least monitor what you're doing and look at what kind of intermittent outcomes you're getting there. Again, you want to make it easily transferable and translatable among settings, and that it attends to diverse resources and needs, and then is characterized by social political sensitivities. In many communities, what might seem to be a great idea will not work particularly effectively. So with that, if we can advance one more. So I won't belabor this. Many of you are probably quite familiar with risk and protective factors, but I do want to just simply say that our goal with all of these services should be really to reduce risk factors and increase protective factors across the four primary domains: family, peer group, community, and environment. In many cases, student assistance program really can bridge a lot of these in many respects, including those that are within the community, especially if they're an outside entity. So Dave, if you can advance this one more time, please. So understanding how risk and protective factors influence one another underscores really the importance of intervening early and developing interventions that really target multiple risk factors. Sometimes there's a tendency to want to just focus in one area or another. But when we do that, that sort of collective effect really allows us to increase things that I think we all care about, especially schools. You know, grade point averages for students, attitudes towards school or school connectivity, a variety of student issues, including violence issues and cultural kinds of issues, as well as sort of bridging the gap with that parental and community support. So Dave, if you continue. If you do this and you sort of think of a whole child approach to everything, then what we start to do is really bring together sort of mental health promotion and substance use prevention activities that are aligned with academics, so that we're really addressing the whole child in each phase of what we're doing here. So Dave. All right, that's going to bring us to our poll question number 3. So how did you hear about this particular webinar? The Talk They Hear You campaign, the newsletter, the SAMHSA Facebook or Twitter, LinkedIn, or any other social media or platform that you may have heard about it. And again, fast fingers. We'll only be open just briefly. All right. With that, it looks like most of you had heard through the newsletter, so thank you for that. And then many of the rest of you, about 22%, found it another way, and thank you to our colleagues in Maryland. So with that, let me turn it over to my next colleague here, who's going to speak on prevention and treatment success for us. Oops. Actually, I think this is, no, this is, sorry, my mistake.
I believe that may be me. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Izzy Chavez. I am the student assistance professional at Hoquiam High School and Middle School. I just wanted to talk to this slide specifically a little bit about the role of the student assistance professional, as well as the collaboration that we've created with the school staff and administration, as well as our community coalition. We know that the role of the student assistance professional is very important. We, I aim to do classroom presentations and get my face out there with the students, and that wouldn't be possible if we didn't have the buy-in by the administration and the role of the school. So I have had great backup and support from the school itself. And and the importance of the role of the coalition to support the community-based behavioral health promotion awareness education to our parents, and to also support our prevention efforts with any sort of materials and funding when it comes to prevention materials. And it just allows me to be able to be more available to the students and promote both at the high school and middle school level from prevention efforts and meeting with students individually and in group. And so the roles and the collaborations and relationships have been really important to, as a role of all three of these levels to be able to implement very successfully. So I would say that would be probably one of the more important roles of each of these groups, is to build that collaboration and relationship.
Thank you, Izzy. Aaron, I think, are you up next?
I think Izzy's continuing on.
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh yeah, let's continue here. So so as you can see, many of you may have seen this slide before, the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So this is a visual, the full continuum of care that we really model the student assistance program within our agency. So we try and implement universal services, like I was mentioning, the classroom presentations, but also those promotions that we try to reach every student with and within our efforts. And then at the tier 2 level, doing intervention and services, those screenings, group services with students that don't quite meet that next level of treatment, but to be able to work and support students and maybe get them, if they need that next level of behavioral health services and treatment, to let them understand that it's not as scary as it may sound sometimes. And that has been again a great success, to be able to implement all these 3 levels within a school district from tier 1 to tier 3. So this is a very complicated, many of you, I mean, I can't even read that, but just another slide to kind of go through on your own time, to kind of look at the different levels and the services that we aim to provide within the school district, from the universal tier 1 all the way to the behavioral health tier 3 level. So just an option for you to go through.
Great. And I'll share from the Ohio School Wellness Initiative's perspective. So we first outlined quality implementation in our state manual, which is in the middle there, and that outlines each SAP service and best practices throughout. Then we used what was in the manual to develop a Fidelity checklist, which is on the right, where student assistance teams could indicate their current performance on each item and best practice, and then identify priorities for improvement. And we do recommend teams complete that. So school professionals and also providers together, working together. And then we developed a pacing guide, which is on the left, to help schools starting from square one, or even jumping in with some initial practices, but how you can build up implementation over the school year. And really recognizing that developing and implementing a student assistance program is a marathon and not a sprint. So it's comprehensive, there's a lot of moving parts, and how can you slowly build the implementation over time? So we outline specific tasks for each month, such as in September, conduct resource mapping for school and community supports. And then this assists schools and partners in making progress, hopefully without being overwhelmed, although I don't know if we achieved that goal. And we're just working on our spring pacing guide right now to push that out, and recommending that schools complete the Fidelity checklist again this spring to reflect on progress and then goals for that next school year, because we all know that the fall in the school, things happen really fast and we want them to hit the ground running. So you can move to the next slide. And this is part of our Fidelity checklist. At the end, there's a goals and action planning template to help with strategic planning. So you'll see that we have the opportunity to reflect on strategies, resources, different barriers that they're encountering. And then once we know what the goal is and what we want to work on, we don't have a magic wand. So we have to make a strategic plan on how student assistance programs can achieve those goals. So outlining specific and measurable goals, and then concrete action steps to help make progress, and then reflect on that and see, did we make that progress and did we achieve goals as designed? And then can move to the next slide. This is from the Fidelity checklist. This is the section related to referral process. So here we have schools reflect on what's going well, areas for improvement, and then different priorities. And this is a slide for student assistance teams where they can take a really active role in planning. And you'll see for the referral process, we recommend having a clear and systematic process, data collection and review, and then clear collaboration with caregivers, and collecting consent and documenting, and then making sure to follow through on all actions and documentation. So we know if we don't document it, it didn't happen. So having a specific SAP record for each student. And you can move to the next slide. And this is what it looks like for the intervention best practices from the Fidelity checklist. And again, we have a really big push on systematic process. For here, we focus on problem-solving process and decision-making to match students with a range of mental health and substance use needs to appropriate services. So that's why that resource mapping is really useful. We also have items related to students with risk and need actually receiving the supports as intended, and then using evidence-informed interventions and making sure that our approaches fit the unique strengths, needs, and cultural linguistic considerations. And I think I'll pass it over to my colleague, Emily, now on the next slide.
Hi. So we will dive a little bit more into the tiered best practices. I know Izzy got us kicked off with some of that work. Before diving in further, here's a brief overview to make sure that we're operating with common definitions in mind. So Tier 1 implementation, as many of you know, focuses on universal prevention supports for all students and creates a safe and supportive learning environment. Practices at this tier provide all students with information and skills to prevent mental health, behavioral health, or substance abuse issues. Tier 2 focuses on intervention for some, early identification, and reducing that need for further intervention at Tier 3. And as we move into Tier 3, focusing on those individualized for few students, and referrals to community services or for wraparound often occur. So looking at, next slide, please, thank you. Best practices that would apply to all three tiers. So some blanketed concepts. They should all be evidence-based, valid, culturally responsive, delivered with fidelity, partnership with the student and the caregiver and the family, and have measurable goals. Next, we'll dive more into what each tier should include specifically. So in the last slide, we covered what all of them would, what should be accompanied in all of them. And now diving into Tier 1, the goal would be to create a safe and supportive learning environment school-wide. And these practices emphasize pro-social skills and expectations, teach and acknowledge appropriate student behavior, and use data to identify overall needs and strengths. At Tier 2, the goal would be to use data to identify needs and monitor progress, have a system to select the appropriate targeted intervention, and problem solve to determine the category of the issue. For example, is our social skills a concern? Is bullying a concern? And one of our Ohio pilot schools identified that implementing a student assistance program helped them identify students in need of Tier 2 services that previously they may have missed or overlooked, and the student then would have missed out on the needed services at Tier 2. Tier 3 involves an individualized plan that's tailored to students' unique strengths, needs, and culture. Data is collected frequently and systematically to monitor those student outcomes. And tier 3 involves an increased level of intensity and explicitness. So when moving from tier 1 through tier 3, there would be a notable increased intensity in duration, time, expertise of the interventionist, and ratio of student to interventionist. Here we include some examples from Ohio schools, and some identify that it's been helpful to do the resource mapping that Christy was just referencing, outlining what they have and knowing what's available at the building, district, and community levels. And so then once they know what's available, then they're able to identify the gaps. And then once they identify the gaps, they can start to create those connections and make connections within the community or within their district to fill those gaps within their building. And this graphic includes some of the examples, certainly not all, of the services being implemented in Ohio schools. So at tier 1, some of the practices identified for all students would include wellness activities, safety, anti-bullying policies, some youth-led prevention work or media campaigns. Tier 2, selective or secondary interventions may include peer support groups, social and emotional skill building, check-in or check-out, or check and connect. At tier 3, a few students may be referred for services or receive wraparound or have a functional behavioral assessment or FBA or a behavior intervention plan. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Izzy.
Yeah, so earlier I mentioned the spectrum of services from the promotion, prevention, treatment, maintenance. So fortunately for us, we've been able to implement treatment services within the school, and that is pretty unique to have. And so we do anything with. I actually have a group of students that I work with called the Grizzly Prevention Squad, who a group of peer-to-peer students that will share information and promote prevention and information to students within the high school and middle school. And then moving on to that prevention, the universal, and going into classroom presentations, it's one of the biggest ways to get well known and for students to get that information, the knowledge, the skills to build a capacity to build understanding of the trends that are happening right now. And working with Jill, and I'll have her add a little bit too, when we are able to identify students and get them to that treatment level, it really comes down to meeting with a team to identify students that may be getting in trouble, maybe having some behavioral issues within class. And our overall goal is to really get them to be successful in school, and that has been a huge part of the student assistance program, is that the school has the students, and we're able to meet them where they're at and continue that care and provide additional support services for them. We can go on to the next slide. So actually, I'd like to turn it over to Jill to explain a little bit about the internal referral process that she's been able to identify many students and turn them in my direction. So I will turn it over to Jill for a minute.
Thanks, Izzy. It's become so seamless. So I can reflect on my 30 years in the profession, and these programs just didn't exist, and the change now, what my job looks like and how we're able to serve students. Izzy being such a presence in our school, that the kids see him as someone, he's a trusted adult. When we are doing referrals, there's no hesitancy. I cannot think of an actual time where I had a student who was hesitant to talk to Izzy. They know that they'll be respected and heard. We meet as a group, and we also meet sometimes just individually with Izzy, depending on kind of what's happening for students. But in our group, our small council, our student-led, our student conference, we'll identify students that we're concerned about. We'll work with Izzy. Our school nurse might be part of that process. Our school psychologist might be in there, admin, grad specialists. We'll just pull in people that we can figure out what kind of supports we can build around these students to help them so that they are finding success. And we're seeing that happening. So we're seeing a reduction in discipline referrals. We do see that. We see kids learning how to choose different strategies, and they're learning those strategies through some of the programs that Izzy brings into the classroom, as well as his work with kids in small group and individual services. We're able to help connect them to mental health if that's the referral that they need as well. And Izzy's a really big part of that. So, and then with the coalition work as well, there's this really pretty incredible buy-in from our community. I think a lot of it has to do with that there's better communication with the community that can support our students. So when they know what's going on in the schools and how we're working to support students and how they can be a part of that, it just really builds that strength and support within your entire community.
And I'd like to add, we have that team that meets on a regular basis to identify students, but oftentimes getting out there and speaking to the teachers who really know and understand their students, they see changes and they see behavioral things that they just kind of look out for, and going into and presenting to the staff and building the relationships with the staff. And oftentimes it's just that, we don't want to add any work to their case. So oftentimes it's that a teacher might just be passing by me or hand me a sticky note with a name. So it might, referrals come in a variety of ways. And I will remind them, that we have referral forms, and it has the signs and symptoms of things to look out for. So it makes it a little bit easier for them to know what to look out for as well.
Yes, I'm just going to jump in quickly. Say, I think a lot of that our staff has been made aware, and they have they've been educated, and a lot of it has to do with Izzy and presentations too. So people are just a little more tuned in. So I know that they do hand you post-its in the hallway, as well as we try to use the form if possible for them as well. And we have students that will self-refer. They'll come down, they know that Izzy's there and that they can trust him, and they'll either go directly to Izzy or they'll ask, and can I have a meeting with Izzy?
Next slide. So Erin, do you want to jump in here and speak to this slide?
So this is the direct services kind of flow chart. You'll find this in the administrator's guide that Rob's going to mention a little bit later. So as you can see, and it's very small, probably need to put my glasses on, but it kind of walks through how a student would get to a direct service, and the different systems and supports that are created within the infrastructure of a student assistance program. And so, as you can tell, there's no wrong door to getting services within the system of a student assistance program. And so it's not just substance abuse service, but all of these other things that we know that students may need to be referred out for, to make sure that they're getting the care that they need so that they can be successful in their recovery process. So with that, next slide. And I'll turn it over to Christy.
I'll take this one, Christy. This is Valerie. So as part of the Ohio School Wellness Initiative, we really felt it was important to really have a step-by-step process for our schools and work with them to develop this flow chart in order for them to successfully move through the process. But in order for that to happen, it's really important that we're building that awareness, and students, families, staff, community, they're all really familiar with the student assistance program. So, from that moment that a concern is identified, be it the student self-reports, you have staff or a peer or a caregiver, they have each step laid out for them, and they know when to move to the next phase. How important it is to notify the caregiver right off the bat when appropriate. Really dive in and take a look at the concerns that are being brought forward, doing those screenings, gathering more information from caregivers, teachers, and others, and then making sure that you're real timely in that response. And then by doing that, you're then able to determine the appropriate level of need for that young person. Next slide, please. So then we have a sample of one of the referral forms that schools can utilize that really goes through those steps to help with that identification, the ongoing documentation that's needed, working with the student, looking at the strengths, taking that strength-based approach with a young person, determining, those next steps and what level of care is needed. Next slide, please. So then we have the second part of the flow chart is when you're developing out that plan. Again, working with that caregiver, the family, and the student to really identify what those best services are to meet their needs. What's the plan for ongoing monitoring, progress, and plan for the implementation? And then, of course, finally, is to implement and evaluate, getting consent, evaluating the progress, that ongoing collaboration and partnership with family, and completing those case management pieces, offer school-based reentry supports if there's a hospitalization. So just all the really critical key components are available in this flow chart that schools can easily refer to in the moment and walk seamlessly through the process. Next slide, please. So if you were in some of our previous webinars, we've shared some slides about the survey that was completed early on. And really, again, it speaks to the barriers around family engagement and consent and why it's so important to really establish those connections, those relationships early on, so everyone is aware of the program and services. Because truly for success, it's having that engagement with a young person's family or the caregivers, and having that consent to ensure that all their needs are met. And with that, I will pass it to Rob, I believe.
All right, and so I've got another poll for you because I know just how much you guys love our polls. So again, fast fingers. Did you attend any of the previous webinars for this? And if you can just take just a few seconds here and answer that, that would be wonderful for us. All right, so about 61% of you hadn't attended a previous webinar, so I'll take this moment to let you know that, and Ryan, if you could send out the link to the website, we have recorded and posted all of these on the Talk to Hear You website, so you will get an opportunity to go back and look at some of the others should you choose to do so. With that, why don't we advance the slide one more time and we will open up the lines for questions. So if we can go ahead and in the chat box. And also just a quick reminder, if you're interested, you can register for the webinar number 5, and we'll put that link in the chat box as well for everybody. So with that, if we can go ahead and open up the chat feature, and you can do this one of two ways. You are certainly welcome to unmute and ask a direct question of any one of us, or you can put it in the chat as well. So your choice. All right. No questions today, I see. Well, we'll give it just a couple more minutes, just in case there's somebody that is still contemplating or working their question up to ask. This is a great time. So we've got folks who are on the front lines. We've got folks who are part of the Department of Education in Ohio. We've got the state folks in Ohio, as well as implementers and administrators in Washington State. So this would be a great time to ask different questions of different experts who are here today. So, and here we go.
And I see some more questions in the Q&A box too.
Oh,
Yes.
I might be looking in the wrong place then. Maybe that's on me. Well, there's 5 there. That would be the question. That would be the problem. I'd have to. So how does this differ from Project Success, an evidence-based student assistance program being implemented in many states? Student assistance only varies in the sense of the application. So Project Success is a very specific program by Ellen Morehouse out of New York, and has some specific implementation issues. What we're advocating for is the use of evidence-based practices. This could be a variety of evidence-based practices that are deployed. That could be everything from motivational enhancement therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy 5, which is an evidence-based program, as a part of direct services. So there is some language and implementation differences that I think preside there. But the idea here really is to get people to think through implementing student assistance. There's a variety of models out there, all of which have some good aspects to them. Not all of them have been validated. If you were to go down to, say, STARS Nashville, who's another evidence-based practice, there are a number of those that have different ways that they've evaluated themselves or aspects of their programs. So that's the distinct difference here, I think, between those. Holly has asked, are they all different? Or do they build on each other? And I'm not sure the R, what the R part of that is, so I apologize. If you could drop
That's
that in
the
the chat.
webinars, Rob. Are the
gotcha.
webinars all different, or do they build on each other?
They build on each other. Might there be a toolkit for getting SAP? We are actually doing some work on some curriculum pieces this year that we'll be rolling out sometime next year, first part of next year, that we'll be deploying. And then we are working on aspects of different toolkits. Now, if you're really kind to our Ohio and Washington friends, they might be willing to share things with you in the short term while we continue down this road. So each one of them has a slightly different implementation. So let's see, Jennifer, sorry, I didn't mean to, oh, never mind, Jennifer, sorry about that. How are these programs funded? So let me just take on from the sort of the federal space, but then invite my Ohio and Washington colleagues to chime in. The reality is they get funded in a lot of different ways. So many states use the substance abuse and block grant. In fact, many programs started on the prevention space that grew into the sort of more therapeutic piece. But the reality is that it happens a lot of different ways. There's not a single source of funding that exists out there. Now, I know Ohio and Washington are both using some ESSER funds and some short-term money to sort of, if you will, do the implementation. But there are, one example could be if you're a licensed mental health group, you could, and you had funding for it, you could probably partner with a school. If you were a local coalition and you're working on the preventative end, you could be doing things like Christy and others have suggested, and that may come out of the prevention block grant. There could be a number of funding sources to support. It just depends on your state and where your locations are. So let me pause here and maybe invite Valerie or Aaron or anybody else who might want to offer something there.
Yeah, as Rob had said, there's multiple ways to provide funding. And so we refer to it as the bake sale, right? So we have lots of different sources and lots of different partners to make this work happen. We are using ESSER funds to do student assistance programs in Washington. We are also using our federal block grant dollars. We have some school district dollars. We also have managed care organization dollars that we leverage to be able to provide that comprehensive full system of care within a school district, the prevention through recovery support. In a school-based model, the student assistance framework really is the pathway that allows the magic to happen. To have the tiered approach, to have the comprehensive prevention, to have the really the structured early intervention is really the power of this, right? And helping kids feel comfortable and connected and able to get into behavioral health services as needed, or to be able to be referred out to other supports that they may need. So it really is, there's a lot of funding for it in different ways. And it really does, depending on where you're at, it really is just thinking through some of those strategic ways of doing this. People are really invested in the work because they see that it happens. And like Jill had shared, like once you build that system and the infrastructure, it's kind of like you can't afford not to anymore.
And I'll just add, local levy dollars in our state are often used to support this work at our mental health recovery services boards. And when we, took on this journey over the past year and a half almost now, like sustainability was at the forefront in our planning at the state level with our partners at Miami, as well as with the pilot schools, to really think through as we're moving through this, every step of the way, how can this be sustained? What can be sustained without additional funding? Who are those other funding partners that we need to connect with and bring to the table? We have a lot of philanthropic groups in the state who are really invested in this work as well, who have become great partners at the state and local level. So there's lots of blended funding and different opportunities to fund components of student assistance programs.
Well, and I would just add one final note. I don't think you need to go too far in thinking that I think everybody has children in mind right now. And so there's a lot of emphasis on creating better systems and better structures for care for children right now across the nation. Certainly the pandemic has brought that out in full force for all of us. So let me just also mention, our colleagues here in Rhode Island also put in the chat that they're also funded out of the block grant as well. And there are a number of states that do that. And I would just put a pitch in, I think as much as anything, sometimes at the community coalition level, the real thing is, and that's why we advocate for the SPIF so much, the Strategic Prevention Planning Framework, is it gives you an opportunity to go to your state level folks and say, we're seeing a need here and we're wondering if. You won't know unless you ask the question or work towards a solution with it and bring something to that conversation. So I would always encourage people, especially if you're a local coalition, to think about that and how you approach your leadership both locally and within your state to see what can happen. You don't know until you ask the question, to be honest with you. Where can we find evidence-based programs for use in SAP? So there are a number of them. I think Christy's providing you a few. We'll be happy to pull a list together of things that we're quite aware of. It depends on, and this goes back to the planning for your services, whether that's at tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, and each one of those would have a different kind of evidence base or evidence-based practice or program associated with it. Thinking about tier 1, you're really looking at social emotional learning kinds of things, school culture, school climate. You're really looking at primary prevention activities, that kind of work. That's a whole different approach in terms of what you might be thinking there. Tier 2 certainly looks like early intervention and identification referral, slightly different kinds of things you'd be looking at there. And tier 3 is really clearly in the more therapeutic side of that. And there's a whole range. I think SAMHSA alone published something on the order of about 100 different manuals that are various therapeutic services that anybody who's licensed in providing those services would likely be quite aware of. Valerie, Christy, or Aaron, any thoughts or comments on that particular part?
I think the power of student assistance programs is that it allows us to go into a school and assess what's already happening, and then really identify the needs and the best practices that could, basically be adapted for that particular building. So again, like Rob mentioned, the social emotional curriculum, universal strategies. Our job isn't to do all of the social emotional curriculum. We hope the district has that in place. And then our role as student assistance professionals is to come in and enhance what's already happening with the, substance abuse education pieces, the curriculum pieces that we want to do to really enhance what's already happening within the system.
Can I add to that, Aaron? So in Hoquiam, we do have an SEL program that is a standalone that's delivered to all of our students in a comprehensive fashion. And that really came along and grew, honestly, probably more after working with Aaron and Izzy and establishing a really strong student assistance program in our school. So, but they dovetail together nicely, and it is a separate piece.
Yeah, and I think it, like Aaron said, it really comes down to the needs in your building, right? When you look at that, and it's going to look different across the tiers. And there's so many great programs out there, but it's really finding the best fit for your students and your school. I think about Blueprints for Change is a great resource. SPRC, if you're looking for suicide prevention, information, resources, there's so many, but determining that need first will really help you narrow down your focus, because it can be a rabbit hole if you just start going and start looking at all these programs, because there are so many great ones, but what's culturally relevant and appropriate for my students in my building?
Yeah, Valerie, you bring up a good point, as well as your community, right? So part of this is also, and I would just compliment Jill and the team from Hoquiam around making sure that there's community involvement. Just because I, as a school leader or teacher, think it's a great idea, it may or may not be a great fit in my community, depending on what it might be. And there are a number of things that can occur out of that sometimes. So it's always good to get both community and school buy-in simultaneously. And to that point, so somebody had asked the question, how difficult is it for schools to get buy-in for the program? Time involvement tends to be a barrier. And while I would say that's true, that anything worth doing probably is going to involve your time and attention if it's valuable to you. That being said, I think sometimes, and I'll just speak from sort of my former life a little bit and then ask Jill, Aaron, and others to sort of chime in a little bit on that part of the equation. When programs are developed, oftentimes they're developed as a result of a crisis in many cases. Something occurred. And as a result of something occurred, then people sort of rallied. I would offer that it's always better to be proactive if possible. It has a better chance than sort of being reactive. What we build usually in the reactive moments are probably less than optimal in most cases, but satisfied an immediate need somehow. That being said, think about the position schools are in, and I usually start this part of a conversation off. If you think about why you as a parent or caregiver would move to any location, well, I'll put it this way. So you've changed jobs and you're moving to a new state and you're moving to a new location. And what's the first question a parent or caregiver usually asks? Well, I wonder how the schools are there. And so you can see the immense pressure that schools are up against every day. So when we're talking about behavioral health programs, and schools not wanting to be branded as the drug school or the violent school, or you can pick your favorite sort of topic that way. It's important to think about the proposition. That being said, I think schools, they work with America's children every day. There's about 131,000 schools in America, about 74 million children every day going to school somewhere in this great country. That being said, schools, communities, and families all need resources and help to help our children grow up and thrive and do well. So let me turn it over to some of my other colleagues here for just a minute and talk about getting buy-in for schools.
For us, when we go in to start up a program, there definitely needs to be a level of readiness to begin with. But again, for us, it's really figuring out what it is that school district is really passionate about, the supports that they really need, and then finding a champion within that building, right? You got to have a champion. You got to have someone that is really going to help spearhead this task and get it started. Once the program's implemented, it really does speak for itself. I mean, we start seeing the changes kind of trickle around. And then when we see that, our referrals go from disciplinary or school referrals to peer referrals, self-referrals, that's when the magic is happening. That's when you've got the model right. But then also be really aware of when you have administration change, those types of things. How do you get ahead of that before the principal or the champion leaves? How do you reestablish who's going to be the backup for that? How do you make your friends, right, to make sure that you don't lose any of the momentum of the program are super important.
I'm going to take on with Aaron too. And one of the ways So we've been database, data driven. We've been in place long enough now too that some of this kind of happens fluidly once those systems are in place. So a great test for me, the ultimate test, right, was when we had to pivot to remote learning immediately. And during that pivot, and Izzy can attest to this as well, we were able to keep those supports in place for students who needed it. We were able to continue to offer and support students, whether they were being referred a parent phone call that I can think about a specific time being at home, working from home remotely. I get a phone call, it's after school hours on a Friday. I'm able to get a hold of Izzy right away. We're able to start putting support in place for that student. And that was the greatest moment for me to realize that at the most challenging time for all of us in our profession, at the most challenging time for our students and our communities, our program was so integrated, such a part of what we do that it was, I'm going to say that it was effortless. I mean, there was no expectation for Izzy to have to respond after hours, but I kind of knew that he would. And so we're able to support that student and continue supporting all of our students while we worked in a remote style as well. So I would just say that just talks about the strength of having put that program in place with all the wonderful supports that Ohio talked about, how to analyze the data, how to really be purposeful and intentional. And then, as Erin referred to, the word magic, and I kind of like that because it does start to look like that because those relationships and procedures are in place, the thing just takes on a life of its own to a degree too.
And it's been interesting for us. We started after COVID in response. So there was buy-in because the need was already there. Schools were struggling. They knew that their students were showing increased needs and they wanted to offer supports and frameworks. But we have seen it's been a challenge with time and having capacity to take on something new. So, and administrator changes, as Erin talked about. So something we're really stressing is this should be integrated and aligned with the work you're already doing rather than something else or extra added on. How can it be incorporated and be an overall comprehensive model that supports what you're already doing? But we're still learning lessons related to this also.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Something I just wanted to add, and I'm so glad that people brought up data, is really, we've talked about planning this from the start, and what is the data that speaks to the district? And I think one of the things that we try and highlight with student assistance is we need to really understand social, emotional, and behavioral health and speak that language, but we also need to speak the language of schools and what's important to them and how to frame the impact of our services on academics. I found that to be incredibly meaningful as we work with school administrators to be able to say your students who are struggling academically are likely struggling with social, emotional, and behavioral health needs. And these services are going to impact their ability to engage meaningfully in their academics. We talk about this a lot. As much as our big hearts would love for everybody to respond that your students will be doing better, feel happier, feel more pleasant, that's not always what's meaningful to a school district who has to worry about test scores and time and seats and things like that. And so really translating the impact into their language, and that's a huge piece of MTSS, is giving the information back to them in the language that they're already speaking in a way that's meaningful to them, is really, really important. And often you'll find that's what gets the buy-in, that's what makes the time. And as Erin said, having those conversations every single year, there's new turnover, there's recommitment that's needed. And so making sure that that remains a focus and that it is delivered to them in a language that's meaningful.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. We are right at time. So I want to just say that we've got a couple of resources. Should you be interested, the Student Assistance Guide for School Administrators is there. This guide is really about trying to help you, if you're a school person or a person who's going into a school, think through and all the considerations, because depending on where you're starting, you could start a student assistance program that is focused primarily on prevention only. And it is really relegated to tier 1 or even tier 2. Or you could do something like what Erin's doing and other folks around the country, where it's really a fully comprehensive program all the way from prevention activities all the way through to therapeutic and recovery support services ongoingly as a licensed behavioral health clinic. So there are a variety of ways that this can occur. This document was really our effort to try to get something out there to help people think through that, especially as the the pandemic and other things were happening. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And then for the national media campaign, Talk They Hear You, this document describes really some of the resources that we've got with the campaign that's really designed to sort of help do promotion work, school awareness, those kinds of things. It really is a tangible document for community coalitions in particular, as a way to enter into the building and have a conversation in many respects. We've got a full suite of resources available that we've created that we hope are useful. If they're not, please give us that feedback as well. We're happy to develop something that is more useful for you. And then lastly, the other tool that I would just point to is we've got about a 9-minute discussion starter video. And this really goes hand in glove with the resources guide to help if you are an outside coalition and you're trying to get a school district in your region interested. This would be a good way to start that conversation. It will show kind of the full dearth of everything we've talked about here today in real time with some actors and actresses to help stimulate some conversation and some thinking as to, well, maybe we might want to consider something like this ourselves. So that being said, don't forget to feel free to register for the next webinar. We're going to be talking about evaluation and improvement, best practices in program evaluation, as well as creating really more of a continuum improvement process. I really advocate for that. Nobody starts in the full meal deal all at once. It takes a period of time to get things implemented. I would applaud Ohio, who has done a stellar job of thinking it through and going through all of that, and as a state taking a big risk and sort of launching down that road. It's never easy. But that being said, I think it's quite worth it. And my guess is if we have this conversation a year or 2 years from now, what will be happening in your state and your schools will be the same thing as that we're hearing Jill and other school personnel say in Washington State. But the reality is there are many states that are doing this. I know Rhode Island's got a student assistance program, New Jersey, there are a number of states, California's got a big one. So that being said, our next date is March 30th. And then if you would be so kind to answer the last poll questions for us, that would be great. All right. Thank you so much. And we look forward to our next opportunity to talk. Feel free to connect with us on social media. And with that, I will say thank you for your time and talent. Thank you to the folks at Ohio and Washington State for your incredible willingness and generosity in all of this. So with that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.